In this episode, we cover the soundtrack of The Kong, and surprisingly, while his face has changed, his music may be less willing to let go of the past. Hello, and welcome back to Under the Tunes, where we take a game series and look at how the music that accompanies it changes over the years and what that tells us about how games adapt to find their voice or make extreme choices in hopes of avoiding disaster. Today, we're taking on the Kong with the Donkey character of the Nintendo franchise. Yes, that's right, the lady-snatching, banana-loving, sometimes absent, ape whose hoofed animal name comes from creator Shigeru Miyamoto's quest to look for an English word to describe stubborn. But we all know the phrase isn't a stubborn donkey. Yes, that's right, in an alternative universe, Nintendo had the guts to call him Ass Kong. But all jokes aside, this chap has been around since 1981, and while we are predominantly focusing on the ripples of the Donkey Kong Country series, we have to go back to the start as his musical roots are still relevant all these years later. We're going to be checking out a few tracks from each game, enough to paint the canvas for each score and the legacy it leaves. Some games that haven't left as big of an impact musically will be jumped over, but this is not done in a way to lessen the game's music, just simply to keep things focused. The arcade cabinet tells the story of the ape scaling construction platforms with the kidnapped Pauline, a clear homage to the 1933 King Kong. Lawsuits aside, the game starts to do its own thing from here, as we scale up as the first version of the famous Mario, then called Jumpman. To score this action masterpiece, composer Yukio Kanioka only had a few short tunes that would loop around. While simple, it's a first core track that still has a presence to this day. And for the track that started each level as Donkey Kong scales the platform, the track was actually suggested by the game's creator Shigeru Miyamoto. Yes, suggested, as the tune was originally from the 1967 show Dragnet. Yet the more jarring, happier tune that follows was back to Yukio, stating that he wanted to put in a more pretty melody, despite the other developers' refusals. And this push for prettiness continued on as the arcade game made its way to the home console, as the Famicom's version greets us with the next core theme. It's a nice little tune that, while so simple, brings in a slight melancholy to it all. The hope of scaling the platform is somehow embraced in this 15 seconds of music. We're now taking a large swing past its sequels and landing over a decade later into a barn in the UK countryside, where the developers Rare have convinced Nintendo to let their guard down and allow a foreign team to take a crack, giving Donkey Kong an all-new look, which outside of a small rendition lasted for an incredibly long time. Yes, Rare's Donkey Kong had an extremely long life, but its music, primarily composed by David Wise with a few tracks from Evelyn Fisher and Robin Beanland, still lives on to this day. And our first track does its due diligence in harkening back to Yukio's title theme. The in-game visuals reinforces that message that this ain't your daddy's ass, Kong. Yes, the additional layers and electric guitar analog creates this funky rock, and if you've been following this channel, yes, this whole video is going to be the monkey instrument Motherland. Ape instrument is also included. But this classic theme is matched in notoriety with David Wise's next tune made for the first area. Yes, we get the extremely catchy DK Island Swing. Yet Wise is economical as the track continues and changes in tune, mood, and more, as we get a darker, more ambient track. Which is a sign of things to come, but this main swing is another core DK tune that ripples beyond this game. And we're not even out of the first area, and we get the next core track that has since influenced the whole category of underwater levels in and outside of this franchise. These slow synthwaves create a unique atmosphere that takes the video game world extremely far from Nintendo's other underwater themes. Aquatic Ambience is a track that will make anyone feel nostalgic. Yes, that includes folk who've never even played the game. It's an emotional fog that never pushes you to feel one way or the other. There's no peppiness or sadness in it. It laments in the in-between, leaving each player or listener to have their own personal resonance. It's fascinating to see how far-stretching this track is. Artists like Trent Reznor and Donald Glover have both spoken on its unique charm, with the track even making it as a sample in a Childish Gambino track. Heck, it's even been used as a creative guidance when the Mojang team asked Minecraft's original composer, C418, to make some underwater music similar to Donkey Kong. It's a fascinating track that still affects new listeners to this day, and may be the most unique track of the Kong's whole library. Yet I believe there is another David Wise track later on that I personally feel outshines it. But we're not there just yet. Moving into the mines, we get a track that makes you all the more panicked to stay on the tracks. And if we listen, we get a more somber rendition of Island Swing, creating a leitmotif. This definitely made these levels scary. Or it's just a musical association to these levels taking all my lives and therefore threatening an appearance of the game over screen. Yes, the more threatening tone does not lift for a while with these new tracks. In fact, there's some real creepy ones like Misty Menace. It's like a haunted ambience for spooky levels, like Stop and Go Station, that depicts enemies controlled by a green and red light. Once I learnt you could practically skip this level by noping out of the front door, I never went back. But at least it's all broken up by these bonus level tracks, and we do have this game's primary use of the monkey instrument. But sooner or later we find ourselves getting closer to the game's big bad, King K. Rool. There's some funky tracks like Fear Factory. Yes, the more industrial vibes that all the games we've looked at so far seem to inevitably end on have made their first appearance. But K. Rool himself is not found in the factory. No, he's on his boat, and therefore his track, Gangplank Galleon, starts out oddly peppy with a jolly pirate tone. Yes, rather odd, but the theme slowly fades out and is replaced with one more appropriate for a final boss. And finally, we finish off with the end credit themes that has an appropriate sports accomplishment tone to it all. Perfect for the David Wise set quite the bar with this memorable score. Jungle swing and aquatic ambience are the more praised tracks, yet throughout there are so many other songs that will speak to all different players. One of the more fantastic scores in the history of video games. But how does one follow that up? Well, let's dive right into its sequel and see what wise choices were made. And so, as we start up the game, it's clear the tone has shifted. Donkey Kong has been kidnapped, and it's up to Diddy and newcomer Trixie Kong to save him. There's no fun swing here as we start physically where the last game ended. Yes, back on a pirate ship. It's all threatening tones of plunder and pillage. Even the lighter tracks keep within the Mihati range. Yet each time we're off to a bonus stage, we do get the missing swing with Token Tango, reprising Island Swing. Our first instance of DK Country 2 reaching back. In fact, another instance of this is with the track Snakey Chanty, which almost finished the King K. Rool boss track with a longer swing variance. As the two small Kongs progress into the mines, we get a track that starts out as if performed in an industrial rave, a common pastime for the 90s Manchurian youth, I'm sure. But the synth waves rise as they make their entrance and bring in that hope in the face of an uphill battle that some of the tracks in Country 1 leaned into. Which is a theme for this whole game. Yes, Country 2 has far more heavy ambience, like musically we're wading through hordes of gremlins and animal bystanders. Forest Interlude brings in a light ray of sunshine between these thicker tracks, but doesn't fully lay off the melancholy tones. Visually, we get a spooky forest which actually has sunlight rays shining through the thick canopy. I think a great quirk of David Wise is to subvert the player through his music. In this instance, he didn't go for the almost expected spooky tune, but gives us this almost reflective track. It's as if he imbues a mood that's hard to define on paper but easy to feel when listened to. We now get the most jarring point in the game, in giving us a level full of barrels that quickly becomes a maze led by bananas, precise timing, and enemies to avoid as you're hurled across the screen. This is a notorious life count sink of a level, and I wonder if the frustration of said level was part of Wire's decision to give us a beautiful calming track. Stickerbush Symphony is this game's aquatic ambience, a track that brings a slight mourning to those lives lost, but in a way that keeps the players striving for some breakthrough in figuring out the path. I don't know about you, but each time I landed on one of the plank paths, I gave myself a break and soaked in the music before continuing on cursing out the two monkeys. Personally, I think the music composed by Wise, especially Stickerbush Symphony, is limited by the sounds of the Super Nintendo. Yes, part of the love for these tracks comes from how they sound, but honestly, I find the more string-based orchestra renditions of this track, they really show the breadth of this music, far greater than the music system inside of the SNES. But that's not to say what an achievement it was in the first place to get any of this music out of this system. But I'd always imagined what this specific track would sound like with a string orchestra, which thankfully has been brought to life by the Nagoya Game Music String Orchestra. Shout out to my friend who's recently moved to Nagoya. If you enjoyed this alternative rendition of Stickerbush Symphony, then check out the video I made following this one, in which we check out some of the DK tracks that have been remade in other medias. Yes, other franchises, movies, and more. As we start to round off this game, we get Primal Rave. The primal element is definitely represented, but not too sure about the rave aspect. But I bring this track to the focus to highlight the aquatic ambience leitmotif that appears throughout. Yes, once more we have a track that harkens back. And for the final level, oh yes, we're back fighting King K. Rool, and while he's now oddly in pirate attire, the level music doesn't dilly-dally in the sea shanty anymore, and just kicks straight into the fight. Whose intro really does remind me of some Metal Gear Solid. Donkey Kong Country 2 is a far more dramatic soundtrack, that while predominantly does have a more threatening undertone than its older brother, it still takes the time to harken back to the more peppy tracks, but still delivers music that builds off on its more loved themes. We're taking another swing over Donkey Kong Country 3, a game that delivers a score that fits perfectly in the Country trilogy, composed primarily now by Evelyn Fisher, with a few tracks by Wise, but for the sake of this video's theme and runtime, I want to shift focus on a few tracks from Donkey Kong 64, as we see how new composer Grant Kirkhope tackles the beloved franchise. Donkey Kong. But little did we know, he was about to deliver the most infamous Kong track to ever be forged.
Here we go. So the finally here, performing for you. If you know the words, you can
As a kid, I never thought anything much of the DK rap besides a fun intro to the game. A shared amusement rose in conversations when it would come up. But I had no idea how much heat it got on release. Alas, in years past, it's now looked upon more favourably, which tends to happen when the intended audience reaches the age of the loudest voice. It was even used to intro DK in the 2023 Super Mario movie.
DK! I'm Donkey Kong!
Yes, the same movie that didn't bother to credit Grant Kirkhope for said song, but hey, check out Kong Compendium's video all about it if you want to learn more. While this rap intro is definitely a newish sound for the Donkey Kong series, the visuals of Cranky on the decks has some nice visual links to him with the old record player from before. Instruments in the Kongs is nothing new, which, while before was a nice little element to the country games, it's expanded to actual usable elements in this one. So there's already a nice bit of evolution here. But that's more of a music visual. So let's take a look at Kirkhope's take on David Wise's Island Swing. That's right, the swing tune is back. But the band has been given some fermented bananas and a freestyle with an extra swing that comes with that drunken swing. Yes, the song's loaded with more bounce and several animal sounds once more. Including a monkey instrument. Okay, you know what? I don't need to announce it each time it appears now. You'll just get the monkey visual. Hang on. I've got a button here. It's a nice cue in with the familiar before Kirkhope brings us a ton of tracks that sound in line with what's come before, but do their own thing with exploring all new melodies, which, well, it's actually quite impressive how many unique tunes there are in this soundtrack. And the track DK Isles is what I think of when Donkey Kong 64 comes up. A more hopeful, relaxed track comes in to match the tropical setting of the explorable island. The high notes of the MIDI flute mixed in with the far deeper brass works off one another so well. The thumping deeper tones, a clear representation of the lumbering gorilla, with the flute, marimba and steel drums all here to represent the wind, waters and island ambience. Outside of Jungle Japes, there's not any other track that harkens back to previous music when it comes to melodies and tunes. But spiritually, the score still follows the country series. Donkey Kong 64 has its melancholy tracks that dig into the same feelings of aquatic ambience and Stickerbush Symphony. The disassociation of how the gameplay makes you feel versus the music, helping a mermaid with her missing pearls, enemies in a crystal cave. Or making a large hippo even larger. And that large threatening tone leap that arises in the more dangerous areas are still present with tracks like Hideout Helm. The combination of that and the timer on screen are never not going to stress me out. Also, does this track remind anyone else of another Rare game? But yes, Donkey Kong 64. I think this one has a ton of great tracks that make the game stand on its own outside of the country title. So while more or less doing its own thing for the majority of its tracks, it still finds time to keep a resemblance to the Donkey Kong musical identity. Actually, come to think of it, it does harken back to the original DK arcade music as well, but that's really only due to the game forcing you to play the arcade game. This wasn't the last time Grant Kirkhope would compose for Donkey Kong. However, that wouldn't come for another 19 years. So let's take another swing across the timeline over some barrel games and drum beats until we get to 2010's Donkey Kong Country Returns. Yes, the Kong returns to his side-scroller gameplay. Diddy Kong returns to help. And a lot of David Wise tracks are back too, as the reins are handed over to Kenji Yamamoto, with additional support from Minako Hamano, Masuro Taijima, and Daisuke Matsuka. Yes, we're back with the title theme. Yet, while music quality in games had advanced to a level that you could basically do whatever you wanted, the track decides to harken back to the MIDI vibes of the 1994 original game, which already I feel might be too much of a return. And the following track keeps this same vibe going as we get another return track with DK Island Swing. Yes, it seemed like the goal was to almost HDify the original score and get it brought over to 2010. Some more diverse and cleaner elements are brought into some of the other tracks to help, but it's clear that the theme was returned with this, as there really isn't a ton of completely new tracks here that aren't at least referencing past melodies. Aquatic Ambience is back once more, with a heavy use of piano before the synth comes in. I think they missed the mark with this one. Minecart Madness also sticks to the original vibe. Heck, even the game over screen is back. Thankfully this time a little less distressing. Tiki Tong Battle is a new track. Indeed, K. Rool was a no-show for this return, so we have a rejected Crash Bandicoot Tiki Mask. And I think its theme is more telling with how the game may have sounded if it went for its own identity. There's still a decent reliance on the tropical vibe and thudding drums, two elements outside of the theme and melodies that see a consistent revival for each game, which I'm always glad to hear. Another new element is the rocket barrel levels. And here too we get a new theme, with this one leaning more on the swing vibes that come from past games, so it's definitely more of an evolution than a remake track. Yes, DK Country Return Score has a bit of an identity crisis. While all great tracks that keep up to the game's title, the jump between more purposefully MIDI sounding tracks and then far more cleaner studio recordings makes for a soundtrack that comes off a little timid, which is probably more so a result of following directions from the game directors than a goal, with Kenji Yamamoto probably feeling like he was able to come up for air when he gets to compose his own tracks. Well, that's how it feels like, at least. As these new tracks do feel like they are stretching their arms, showing what 2010 can sound like. But with the 2014 follow-up Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, it seems like they went for the real return, as the lead original composer of the country games, David Wise, was back. Yes, he had returned. And no, this wasn't a situation of, wow, if we're going to use this past track so heavily, we should probably give him the job. This was more of a, David, are you free to help? Yes, I am. I'm not even being silly, that's basically how it came about. Yes, David would have been there for the actual return if he wasn't busy leaving Rare. Which is a shame, as that would have been a confusing transition. Anyway, he had returned to give the Tropical Paradise a new sound that still harkens back to its past, but more importantly, established its future. Because there was no more country games after this. Overall, Tropical Freeze has its own sound, one that leans into the tropical aspect with steel pan drums, ukuleles, and even big surf elements. With the Norse vibe to present the game's baddies. Yes, David Wise came back and wanted to bring something new at the core of his next country score. However, at this point, would it be a country game without calling back to all those past themes? If you've been paying attention, you know that this was a definite no. Yes, in the intro cutscene, we get a nice reference to the original background title music from the Famicom game. And for the first level, Mangrove Cove, we get a rearrangement of DK Island Swing's main melody. Yes, familiar, but it's doing its own thing. And yet, when we go into the underwater portion of the level, it's the same story but with aquatic ambience. Its background elements are here, but the main melody continues on the previous track's notes. But then the familiar MIDI sounds that once more harken back to aquatic ambience. And right after this, as we go into the world map, it's more of a closer recreation of the earlier world map tracks. But let's hop back into our underwater themes, as it seems like they all harken back to aquatic ambience in one way or another. Shipwreck Shore's main theme is sort of a developed background layer from the previous Mangrove Cove, but its underwater theme plays with that and creates quite a more positive, peaceful tune. But we still have the long reverb percussion from aquatic ambience. But even outside of the waters, aquatic ambience gets an interesting tip of the hat in tracks like Horn Top Hop, and High Tide Ride. As the Kongs end up in the more African-looking landscape, we get the track Savannah Symphony. Have a listen and see if you can tell what previous tracks have been given this African remix. And it doesn't stop there. Not long after, the African windpipes and marimbas we just heard are back, recreating a track from the last game, as the Kongs are back on the rocket barrel. Wise was even exploring how to bring back tracks that we hadn't heard since his original 1994 soundtrack, like Fear Factory via Frozen Frenzy. Now, while for the most part these past tracks have been brought forward into more expansive arrangements, you will still get some full themes reappear. Yes, the previously referenced DK Jungle Swing comes back with all its glory. keeping it to its original version rather than the continued swing variant. But the track is then expanded to recreate the second part of the track, which is rarely referenced. But the theme that had previously been brought back from the game over screen has been replaced with a more cheeky elevator theme that leans into a more playful side of the score. And I do want to highlight that while we have been looking at how the old themes have been adapted, the soundtrack to Tropical Freeze is mainly made up of new tracks. One that shines bright is Seashore War, a track that when finished, Wise reported was a moment where he could sit back and say, "Yes, this is perfect." Then a little while later into the game's production, the level was shifted into an alternative world stage, so the track inevitably changed it up to incorporate instruments that better reflected the new surrounding. Tropical Freeze is a far more confident score than Country Returns. Wise came back to bring more to the music library of DK tracks, but it was also clear that representing his own musical legacy was expected at this point in the franchise. And with those tracks, Wise went beyond more MIDI recreations and chose to adapt the themes to suit different moods and locations. Quite often with a franchise, we see the music passed around between composers, adding their own flares and more. And for the most part through this series, there was a conscious effort to keep the core principles like thudding drums, jazz swing, melancholy slow ambiances, and a cheeky sensibility to have a bit of fun, and still having that link all the way back to the Donkey Kong Famicom title screen. But all of these soundtracks have felt like they were bringing back these established themes as a rule. So, to end with, let's take a look at a game that had no reason to bring back any of these themes, but in doing so, created a collection of loving tributes to Donkey Kong's past. This score is completely bananas! Dives through numerous genres and doesn't let up for a second. It's uniquely its own with the biggest thuds and so much masculine heft in many of the vocal elements. Lead composer Naoto Kubo, past composer of Mario Odyssey, brings the joy and heartfelt sounds, and jungle instruments to give a bit more depth to what a score about a lumbering gorilla can be. And yet, with all new themes, he finds time to reference some long-established Wise tunes. And for the first time, several tracks include singing. Yes, in Mario Odyssey, we were serenaded by the original Nintendo damsel in distress, with the return of Pauline from Donkey Kong Arcade, who sings a tune as they celebrate Mario's past defeat of Donkey Kong. And what do you know? She's back, but in kid form! And so is the inclusion of female vocals for the large tracks that kick off when Donkey Kong gets granted powers and see him transforms into several animals. Yes, the subliminal messaging of these tracks is so well composed that you might even be able to guess what kind of animal he's transformed into just by listening to the music. The fun of Bonanza is reflected extremely well in its score, with Naoto Kubo delivering an excellent soundtrack that does still harken back to the past. So, let's take a listen at how those past tracks are represented. Yes, Donkey Kong Country's music legacy is well and truly alive in 2025. With large big band versions, one that recreates the original sounds of the limited hardware, and light tweaks that make sure the old track still fits seamlessly into this new rendition of the character. But the country games weren't the only ones referenced. Yes, Bonanza had a hat it wanted to tip to Grant Kirkhope with the amazing DK rap.
Donkey Kong is here.
And with some later released DLC where you get to explore DK Island. The Donkey Kong 64 tune has returned as a chilled theme that floats on the cool breeze. Donkey Kong 64 wasn't the only other game to be referenced. We're headed back all the way to the original Donkey Kong arcade game with the final 2D challenge course. And to finish the game's finale song Breakthrough, we get a big old song, once more sung by Pauline, and it's very much its own thing.
We're breaking through, down to the core, no stopping us, not anymore.
Until about 2 minutes 40 seconds into the song, where we get this small calming moment that's able to bring us back to the same source of jungle swing. Yes, the Famicom Donkey Kong title screen.
Look at us, so big and small, two together through it all. Heart of gold, a wish come true. You and me, unbreakable.
It's a great callback that works so damn well, and really does continue Yukio Kanoka's want to pretty melodies in a game all about a large, stubborn gorilla. A track that was made to give a break in the constant chaos that was to come after pressing start had influenced every composer after him to make sure that their music was also full of pretty melodies each time the character was back on our screens. Of the games that we have covered so far, we have not encountered a series that was so respectful of its past and took every opportunity to make sure the music that accompanies the Kongs harkens back to its 80s origins. I think some of the Donkey Kong music is high up there in the rankings of best video game music. Sometimes new renditions are needed to make one realize at how good so many of these past tracks were. We all have our favourites, and I think mine is actually Donkey Kong Isles, as I was hit with this beautiful comfort of familiar music of my youth when I heard the track reappear in Bonanza. But what was your favourite track? Were there any from the many Donkey Kong games we didn't cover? Do let me know. For the next video, we're not taking a giant leap, as we're sticking with Nintendo, but we're well and truly leaving orbit and heading off into space, as next time on Under the Tunes. I hope you've enjoyed this look at Donkey Kong's music as much as I have. But we're not stopping there, as we take a look at the tragedy of Donkey Kong's music in the Mario Brothers movie. And what the hell happened to Donkey Kong's voice? Yes, that video is ready to go now, so I hope to see you over there in the extracurricular video. Don't forget to share this video, that hype thing, that button there, try pressing it. But until then, I'll see you next time under the tunes.